I have an idea for a Chrome extension that I've been wanting to build for some time now. The idea is that almost every day I find myself sending emails. And when I'm writing up these emails, I usually commit a bunch of grammatical errors. So what I usually do is copy a chunk of text, head over to ChatGPT, paste the text, and then I enter a prompt like, help me improve this text grammatically. I then would copy the output that ChatGPT gave me and then come back to my email and paste the text. So for example, if you're sending an email to a potential employer, you'll want to make sure that you're not making any grammatical errors. So what I would like to build and what would be a huge time saver for me would be if I could just select all the text, right click, have some option here show up like improve text, and then that will fire off a backend process that will pass that text to GPT, improve it, and then I get the output shown in like a tooltip, and then I can just copy the text and paste it here. And I know there's probably a bunch of extensions or tools that already do this, but I've never built a Chrome extension before, and I thought it would be a very interesting learning experience for me and hopefully for you. Before I start building, I just want to talk a bit about the tools that we're going to be using here. So this is year 2024 with the year 2025 just around the corner, and I'm not going to be building this all by myself. I'm going to try and use Cursor to help me build, and we'll see if it's possible, the entire extension in JavaScript. I should mention that I have limited experience with Cursor. In fact, I think I only used it once, first when it was released, and I didn't really understand it too much, so I just uninstalled it and I just went back to VS Code. So I'm very curious to see if we'll be able to generate our extension entirely with Cursor. Now, the last thing that I want is for my extension to be useless. And that's exactly what it will be without a proper backend. For building out my backend, I'm going to be using BuildShip. BuildShip will allow me to build my API without having to write a single line of code. I'll be able to use an intuitive visual builder that will just allow me to grab a text generator node from GPT, place it in my API workflow, feed it the text that I submit from my extension, and output a beautifully improved version of the text. Once ready, I'll be able to ship my API with the click of a button. To begin, I'll head over to my desktop and I'll want to create a new folder for my extension. I'll call this GPT Text Improver Extension. And then I already have Cursor open, so I'll just open that folder, go to desktop, and then select it here. Okay, let's get started. So I want to open up the composer. So I believe the command for doing that is Command I. And then here what I'll need to do is enter a description of the extension I want to create. So let's do that. I want you to help me create a Chrome extension. I want to be able to select any piece of text, for example, from an email body, and then I want to be able to right click and select an option, improve text, which will then make an API call. And so we don't have our API deployed yet, or even built for that matter. So what I'll do here is just tell Cursor to just make a dummy API call and then give us back a dummy response just so that we can have something to display. So for now, you can just make a dummy API call and then just return some dummy text. After the API call and the text is available, I want to display it in a beautiful tool tip with a button at the bottom, name, or let's just say here, copy to clipboard. Once this button is pressed, the displayed text will be copied to the clipboard. Okay, so I think this is a good enough description of the extension we want to create to get started. This will be pretty interesting, right? Because we have an empty folder here. We haven't created or added any files in this folder. So Cursor should generate a number of files for us. So let's see. We'll enter this prompt and let's see what we get. Okay, so it's going to create a number of files here, a manifest file, a background script file, a content script file, some HTML and CSS for the tooltip. Whoops, let's scroll back up. Icons for the extension, okay, that's pretty cool. I mean, I didn't ask for any icons, but let's see what we get. It then gives us the list of files it generated for us. So here we can see that it created this manifest.json file. And our extension name is text improver. That's good. We have a description. We have some permissions that we want to allow. And then we have a background service worker specification here pointing to a background.js file, which is another file that it created. This looks good, so we can accept this change. Let's go down to the next one, which is the background.js file. For now, I'll just accept this because I'm not really sure what's going on here. This is the first time I'm building a Chrome extension. So we'll find out eventually what this background.js is doing. Let's continue on. And then we have our content.js. But it says here that this script will handle the tooltip display and clipboard functionality. Great. I'll accept this as well. And let's see. Next, we have some styles. These are the CSS styles for styling our tooltip. Beautiful. And it even created a README file for our project if we want to submit this to GitHub. I'll accept this as well. Finally, it just gives us a summary of all the files it created for us. I just noticed here that it's telling us the extension is ready to test and that we'll need to add 2 icon files there. Originally, I thought it had generated the icons for us, but that's okay. For this demo, we don't need any icons. Here, it's telling us to head over to the README to read the installation instructions. So I'll close out of the composer for now, and I'll open up that README file. And it says to install our extension, we need to head over to that URL, enable developer mode. So I already had developer mode enabled, I believe. And then I need to click load, unpack, and then select this directory. Okay. But before I do that, I just want to explore the files that it created for us. So we already looked at the manifest.json, nothing interesting here. I want to look at the background.js file. This is where it's making the fake API call. We can see here it added the comment simulate API call with dummy response. Eventually, we're going to ask it to, instead of making a dummy API call, we want to make an actual API call to our API endpoint. But for now, this will suffice. Next, I'll take a look at the content.js file it created. It's doing a bunch of stuff here. We have a show tooltip function that it generated for us. And within this function, it looks like this is where it's creating the tooltip for us. I'm kind of lost with some of the code it generated for us. So the best thing to do next is to see if our extension is actually working. If we can go back to this README file, we have the installation instructions here. I'll head over to the extensions page of my browser. And then here we can load unpacked. And then we can select that directory, which is this one. And let's select it. Oh, but it's giving us an error here because it looks like we have declared that we have icons, or we've specified icons in our manifest JSON file, but those icons do not exist. So let's just remove that. We'll head over to the manifest. And then for now, we can just comment this out, or actually we can't comment in JSON, so we can remove it. Great. So let's retry. And there we go. Our extension has now been added to our browser. So let's give it a try. I'll go back to my Gmail and I may need to refresh here. And then I'll just select this horrible piece of text here that I wrote. And I'll whoops. Let's do that again. Right click. And then here we have the option. So we can see that it's using the default icons for extensions, but that's okay. We can click improve text and let's see if we get our tooltip displayed. We do. That's awesome. Okay. So let's see what happens if we click copy to clipboard. Wow. You can see that it even added a nice animation for us after we click the button. So now if we select all of this, we can paste and there we go. That's just our dummy text, but the extension is actually working. This makes me really excited because I didn't have to write a single line of code during this process. And added to that, my lack of experience in creating a Chrome extension, I'm really blown away by this. But we're not done yet. If I want to deploy my extension and have millions and millions of people across the world use it, I can't have it always be returning this dummy text. So the next step is for me to wire my extension to a backend API so that I can submit the selected text, generate the improved version of the text using GPT, and then return that as the output that I display in my tooltip. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I'll be using BuildShip to create the API for my extension. BuildShip will allow me to quickly build this API, you'll see, without writing a single line of code, and ship it instantly. And then from there, all I'll need to do is just tell Cursor that, hey, this is my API endpoint. Please use this instead. To begin, the first thing I'll do is create a brand new workflow, and I'll start from scratch. Then I'll give it a name. I'll enter here GPT text improver. This will be a public API, so I want to be able to access it via a endpoint URL. To do that, I'll need to add a new trigger to my workflow. I'll click here, and then I'll select the REST API call trigger. For the path, I don't want to use this random stuff. What I'll do is I'll replace it with something different. I'll just say GPT text improver API. And then I'll leave the HTTP method set to post, and then I can click connect. And now I'm ready to start building the core functionality of my API. The first thing we want to do is accept an input. Whenever we select a piece of text and then we right click and then click improve text on our extension, that will submit a request to our BuildShip API. Within that request, or I should say within the request body, I want to have a text field that will contain the selected text. What I'll do here is I'll define that as an input. I'll create a new input and then I'll call this text. And I'll leave the type set to string and mark this as a required field, and then we can save. And by default, you can see here that this text field will be extracted from the request body. That's good. So I can switch over back to the build tab and I can start adding the core node of this workflow. I'll go to add node. And then what I want to use here is the OpenAI text generator node. I'll scroll down and you can see that there is a bunch of other integrations that I can use if I want to expand the functionality of my extension. I could use the cloud text generator node instead. If I scroll down, I can find the OpenAI group and you can see that there's a bunch of other OpenAI related integration nodes available. But for my extension, all I need to use is the text generator node. Now I need to configure the node. First, let me just double check that my API key is already set. Indeed it is, so that's good. Next, the node comes with some default instructions and prompt. We can edit this and we'll replace this. And here I'll just enter a very simple prompt. Improve the text grammatically and return only the improved text. And that's good enough. Next, we need to specify the text that we want to improve. We'll delete what's here, and then we'll want to select our text input that we previously created. And before proceeding, we can verify that the text generator node is working. So to do that, we'll just need to click on the play icon to bring up the test panel here. And then we already have our instructions specified. To test the node, we just need to enter any random piece of text. So here I'll just enter some misspellings. Hi, how are you, my friend? And then I'll click test text generator. And it's working fine. You can see the final output here is the improved version of the text we entered. Great, so our node is working fine. And the last thing that we want to do here is just return the output of this text generator node. So we have a flow output node here. And by default, the output to use is set to the last node output, which is the text generator node. So we're all good. And believe it or not, that's all there is to our API. And just as with Cursor, we didn't have to write a single line of code. And now all we need to do is ship our workflow. Our API is now live. And here we have a API endpoint URL that we can use to trigger our BuildShip workflow. I'll copy this API endpoint URL, and then I'll switch over to Cursor, and I want to ask it to use this URL instead. So the API call is being made in the background.js file. What I'll do is I'll select all of this, and then I'll click chat. Now I'll tell Cursor, please make a post request to this API endpoint URL. In the request body, include the selected text. This API will then return the improved text, which is what I want you to display in the tooltip. So let's submit this. Okay, let's take a look at what it is giving us here. So I'll help you modify the background.js file to make an API request instead of using the dummy text. And these are the changes it's making. So we can see here that now it's making an actual request to the API URL that I provided. It's a post request. The content type is application JSON. And then importantly, in the body of the request, we're sending the selected text. And then we're waiting for a JSON response, which will contain the improved text. And if we scroll down, it just gives us a summary of the change. This is pretty close, but I know there's an issue with this. My BuildShip workflow is not returning JSON, but instead just plain text. So I'll just need to tell Cursor here that my API is returning text, not JSON. Now, if I look at the code it generates, I can see here that it changed from response JSON to response text. Perfect. I'm satisfied with this output, so I'll just apply these changes and then I'll accept. Okay, now for the moment of truth. I'll close out of this and then I'll need to head back to my extension, and I believe I'll need to refresh it. And now I want to go back to the same email I was composing before, and then I want to undo this. I should have the horrible text from before. And now I should be able to select this, or before I do that, I may need to refresh again. Now let's give it a try. I'll select the text, right click, and click Improve Text. And we are getting some API errors. But this is good. This means that it is actually calling our BuildShip workflow. So I need to switch over to BuildShip and see if there's some errors. I can expand the logs of my workflow. Let me just refresh here. And it's failing. Okay, why is it failing? It looks like the content is not being passed. Okay, I don't see the text being submitted anywhere. Let me switch to the Connect tab, and then here I'll click Get Data, and this will load the schema of the latest request. And here's our body, and here's the text. So I'm not sure why this isn't being set. Actually, let me delete it. And then what we can do is select it from the request schema and then add this input. And then let me head back to the build tab. And then I may need to do some changes here or not. It's still selected. Okay, let's ship these updates and then we'll test the extension again. And then hopefully this time it works. So I'll head back to Gmail. Let me just refresh. And then I'll select the text again. I'll right click and then I'll click Improve Text. And there we have it. We get back a beautifully improved piece of text. Hi, Mr. John Doe. Thank you for contacting me. I'm excited that you have considered me for the lead software engineer position in your company. If you need any additional information from me, please let me know. And that's much better than the text I have selected. So I'll just copy this to clipboard and then I can replace this text. And with that, my revolutionary Chrome extension is now completed. I think what's great about this type of building workflow is that you can quickly prototype an idea without having to write a single line of code. You just witnessed for yourself, along with me, that I was able to use Cursor to generate the entire Chrome extension for me, all by just giving it some prompts. And then when I was ready to create the backend logic for my extension, it was only a matter of minutes before I had a fully working and deployed API thanks to BuildShip. That's all for this video, and thank you for watching.